Close that out. Grab my laser pointer. Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, An Introduction to Plant Identification. I'm James Stevenson. I come to you from the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension in Pinellas County, Florida. We're a cooperative with the University of Florida here in the county, and we offer free research-based information to our residents on how to make decisions that are important in their lives that don't have expensive connotations to the county. Today's topic, an introduction to plant identification. I know it's kind of a big topic. I've been studying plants for a long, long time. I graduated from Clearwater High University way, way, way long time ago. But even then, I was very much interested in the outdoors, the beach, and my own backyard. I went on to the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, which is in the mixed mesophytic forest in the eastern US, the most diverse forest type in North America. So lots of plant diversity there. Speaking of plant diversity, I ended up at Kew Gardens in London, one of the world's premier botanic gardens, where I worked and studied for 3 good, wonderful years, and was then recruited to move on to the University of Oxford, the botanic garden there, to curate the collection of hardy plants and work out the taxonomy of the plants in that garden. So I've had a little bit of experience on the subject, and I hope to impart a little bit of that onto you today. So from all those wonderful places where I've been, I've probably ended up in the best, here at Brooker Creek Preserve, 9,000 acres in Pinellas County of undeveloped upland and freshwater wetland habitat. If you haven't had an opportunity to come and visit, we are the most plant and animal diverse spot in Pinellas County. So definitely worth coming to see. So today's presentation is an introduction. I could show you a bunch of slides of plants and tell you their names, but that might help a smidge. But what I really would like to do today is give you a foundation, a very, very basic foundation on how to identify an unknown plant. By hopefully showing you things, plant groups that you're already familiar with. And then look at what kind of characteristics we use when we identify an unknown specimen and what kind of tools are available. And there are many. Sometimes people ask me, what is the one book that they should get to identify all plants? And there isn't one book. It's kind of like saying, what's the best camera I could buy to take an award-winning photograph? It's a little bit more than a single element. It's a whole suite of elements that we use to correctly identify plants. So I hope that makes sense. I'll make another comparison. If today's class was an introduction to playing the guitar, I could sit and play the guitar for you, but then you wouldn't go home and be able to play the guitar. I could sit with you and tell you the different parts of the guitar and different chords perhaps, and that might be a little bit better. That might give you the foundation on an understanding on what it's like to play the guitar. Just like today, I hope to properly give you the foundation on how to identify plants. So all those aside, let's start looking at plants. Now there are 4, at the time of the creation of this presentation several years ago, there were at the time approximately 400,000 identified individual species of plants. So what humans do, we need to classify those. A great huge list wouldn't do us really that much good, but a list of categories can certainly help. And humans classify things. It's what we're really, really good at. And we can classify plants. Plant classification is a discipline in and of itself. Just like playing a guitar, certain people spend their entire lives on plant classification. So how do we classify plants? We put them into larger groups. We break those 400,000 down into discrete bundles. And humans might describe trees as a discrete group of plants and vines as a discrete group of plants. You could recognize a tree, you know what a vine looks like. Flowers, the nice pretty things that you put in your garden every year to make it pretty. Vegetables, a group of plants that are very economically important, of course, and weeds, another economically important group of plants. And these are definitely categories of plants, but they're not scientific, are they? One person's vegetable could be another person's weed. And a flower, you might be surprised that certain plants are flowering plants, like the grass in your lawn. So these are kind of subjective categories. What we want to look at today are the scientific categories of plants, and you'll find that plants fall into 4 major groups, and we are really only going to focus on the largest group of plants today. So of the 400,000 known plants, we have a group that are called the mosses. They represent the very first of the land plants. They're very low growing. You don't get much more than a little velvety green layer and an occasional spore producing structure that reproduces the particular species. So those are the mosses. The ferns, kind of moving up a little bit in complexity, they have vascular systems. They still reproduce by spores. They produce the spore producing structures on the underside of their leaves, which we refer to as fronds. That's the next group of plants. Moving up a little bit more in complexity, we get plants that actually produce seeds for reproduction. And those plants that produce seeds without flowers and without fruit that predate the flowering plants are referred to as the gymnosperms or the conifers. These are the cone-producing plants. And finally, we get to the largest group of plants, the flowering plants, the most diverse group, the most studied group, and the largest with 400 plus different families. So even further circumscription. So just 4 groups of plants, 165 different families of mosses, 35 families of ferns, 14 families of gymnosperms or conifers, and 400 of the flowering plants. So let's look at the flowering plants today. It's generally what most people are interested in studying anyway. Now, why do I keep saying this word family? That's usually not a word that's most people associate with plants, but plants are put into these scientific groups that the botanists refer to as families. I hear you. What are you talking about? Well, let me put this in some context with a group of organisms, multicellular organisms, that you might recognize as a family of organisms. Here's a family of multicellular organisms. And what is this family? It's the family of the, yes, it's the cats. And science refers to the cat family as the Felidae. We have to put everything into another language. We have to have a fancy word for everything. It's part of being science. So the Felidae is a large circumscription of the group of multicellular mammal organisms, mammals within the group Felidae, the family that are known as the cats. Plants are organized in the same way. There's a large circumscription of a group of flowering plants that are referred to as the beans, the legumes. Very good. That's a family. The families have characteristics that show you that they're related to one another. Can you see that these organisms are related to one another? Can you see that these organisms are related to one another? Their seeds are very, very similar. They have enough differences to separate them into individual species, but they have enough similarities to allow you to accept the fact that they belong to the same family. And the beans, their fancy name for their family is the Fabaceae. Have you heard of faba beans? That's the root, that FAVB, fava. Fava is the family of the beans. And there are lots and lots of different beans. The legumes, of course, a lot of very economically important members of this family. So within this giant kingdom of plants, we have the flowering plants. Remember, we had the conifers. We're not focusing on the conifers. We're focusing on the flowering plants whose seeds are contained within a fruit. Flowering plants produce a fruit, not necessarily one that we can eat all the time. Botanists' fruit are different from a nutritionist's fruit. And I need y'all to be botanists today because we're going to be talking about a ripened ovary being referred to as a fruit. Whether it's dry or fleshy or edible or not, this division is the angiosperms. And as we mentioned in an earlier slide, there are 400 different flowering plant families. Now remember our cat families? Here we have an example of the diversity of the flowering plants. So each one of these individual panels represents a member of a different plant family. And you might be able to recognize a few of these. Some of you might have these agapanthus, these Nile lilies in your garden. Some people might grow the chenille plant if you see that, that fuzzy inflorescence there. Here's little shy pansies down here at the bottom, the Australian parrot lilies, passion flowers, peace lilies, daisies, bougainvillea, and so on. These all represent flowering plants, but they're all from different families. But within each one of their families, there are resemblances to their kin. How do we take an unknown specimen and drill it down to what it really is? Well, we take it through a process of elimination. And with flowering plants, that's quite easy. You hold it up, you have a flower in your hand. You've eliminated the mosses, you've eliminated the ferns, you've eliminated the conifers, and now you're stuck with just this one group, the angiosperms, the flowering plants with their seeds and a fruit. But then you could make an even more precise elimination. You can determine whether that plant belongs to the class of plants known as monocots or the class of plants known as eudicots. Monocots having 80 families within that class. So again, we're eliminating 300 other families. Or if you've eliminated a monocot, then we've got just 300 families to go through to get to an identification. So these classes, these monocots and eudicots, these two classes, let's look at the differences between those two. And all y'all can do this. You can do this. You can do this with fruit from the grocery store. I'm serious. You can determine if you have a monocot or a dicot plant in your hand. If you happen to have a fruit with a seed inside, you have one single seed leaf. That's a monocot. That's how it gets its name. The seed leaf is referred to as a cotyledon. Many more dicots, obviously with their 300 families. And if you think about a bean is a dicot, and a bean is the seed of a legume, and you know that it breaks into two halves. Or if you've ever planted a sunflower seed, and you notice that when it germinates, it has those two little fat seed leaves. Those are the cotyledons. And if there are two, it's a dicot, two cotyledons. Di meaning two, and cotyledon meaning the seed leaf. Monocots have parallel leaf veins. So a grass is a monocot, and you can imagine a flowering plant, and you can imagine pulling a grass blade along those parallel veins. Whereas the dicots, they have netted veins, and you can hold in your imagination an oak leaf up to the sun, and you can see that network of vein patterning. Something that we don't really use beyond leaf patterning and flower patterning in determining whether or not a plant is a monocot or a dicot, kind of comes at the microscopic Vascular bundles and monocots, that's the xylem and phloem, if you remember from ninth grade. They're kind of scattered. I mentioned that grasses are a monocot. Bamboo is a type of grass. Chopsticks are often made of bamboo. If you stare a chopstick end on, you can see these little scattered vascular bundles throughout the chopstick. Whereas dicots generally have their vascular bundles in rings. Imagine the annular growth rings of an oak tree. Most importantly for identification, especially if you have a flower in your hand, is that monocots flower parts are in multiples of 3. So here we have an iris, and we have 1 flower, 2 flowers, 3 flowers, and each one of those flowers are separated into 3 distinctive parts. So 3s or multiples of 3s, whereas dicots, the flowers are usually in multiples of upwards of 4. 4, 5, 7, 9, etc. So let's look at some families within that group of monocots. The palm family. Do you think you would recognize a palm? I bet you're really good at that. They're in a family. That family has a fancy botanical name, the Ericaceae, because Areca is the genus, we'll get into that later, the genus of a particular palm. So the whole family gets called by this one genus name that lends its name to the whole family name, Ericaceae. Here we have the saw palmetto, and it's a monocot. It has parallel leaf veins that split along these margins in the case of the saw palmetto to make these kind of hand shape or palm shaped, that's how they get their name, palm shaped fronds. Up close, what are the multiples that we're going to expect the flowers to be in a monocot? Do you remember from 2 slides ago? That's right, 3. So let's do some counting. All right, let's take this one flower here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamens. And how many petals? 1, 2, 3. See, it's true. I'm not making it up. This monocot has got flower parts in 3s. Let's do it again. 3 petals, 6 stamens. Important to note here that when you are doing a plant identification, you need to focus on more than just one character or one flower. In the case of this inflorescence, we have hundreds of tiny little flowers. Don't just count on one, because plants are really good at throwing you for a loop and maybe producing one flower that has those 4 petals as a little slight mutation. So it's important to take the trend over a population if you have that luxury. Another palm is the cabbage palm. So again, it grows completely different from a saw palmetto. This one actually becomes more of a tree, but it still has those monocot parallel leaf veins that split into those palm-shaped leaves. This is the cabbage palm. And again, its inflorescence, the bunches of tiny little white flowers that this produces, they look similar to the saw palmetto because they're in the same family. So they will have floral characteristics that are very similar. If you took one of these flowers from a cabbage palm inflorescence and held it up to a flower from the single flower from the saw palmetto, you'd be hard pressed to identify the whole plant from that one flower. But taken as a whole, all the different characters can help you tell the difference between the two. But you can also see that because of those similarities in in flower structure, how these things are related, how they're in the same family, how they all have their cat faces, as it were, to compare them again to the cat family. Another huge monocot family are the grasses, the Poaceae. Poa being the genus, POA being the genus of the most widespread grass. I think it's even found in the Antarctic, one of a very few plants that are found there. So grasses are a very, very large family, a very, very diverse family. This is actually a picture of the grass garden at Kew Gardens, where I had the pleasure of working We actually took all the plants out of this at one point, re-soiled, re-turfed, and replanted all of these different species of grasses. And you can see, you might be familiar with some of them. Pampas grass. The lawn is the poa, POA, that gives its name to the family. And then all the other clumping and running grasses that belong in this family. So you can see the diversity within the grasses. Another important grass, of course, is corn. And it has its particular way of growing and flowering. Still, the flowers of the pampas grass, the corn, and even the bahia grass that a lot of us have as a lawn grass, they have these inflorescences. They produce tiny, tiny, tiny little flowers. They don't produce showy petals. They're wind pollinated. But all the grasses, their flowers are put together the same way. They have a this and a that and a one of these and a couple of those and sometimes these. So all these words that are associated with the grass flowers, they all have that in common, putting them in that family. Not to put too fine a point on it, but we'll just look at one more monocot family, the orchids. And I added this one because I feel like you've probably heard of orchids. Just about everyone has. And here we have the ones that you can get in the front door of Publix and then take home and dye because they tell you to put ice on them, which is absolutely barbaric. Anyway, I digress. The moth orchid. In the Orchidaceae, characteristic of the orchid family, this landing petal, that's very uniquely shaped among the other petals, but it's definitely a petal. So let's count 1, 2 petal, 3 petal, 4 petal, 5 petal, 6. So here we have multiples of 6 in the moth orchid. One of our native orchids in the same family is going to have the same morphological characteristics. And look, here it does. That landing petal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The one in the background with the landing petal. This is our butterfly orchid. It's flowering now here at the preserve on the boardwalks over the swamp. Look up, it's an epiphyte growing from the branches of the trees. Another of our native orchids. Do you see the familial characteristics? We have the landing pad and the 4 other petals of the snake mouth orchid. And the tooth petal false rain orchid, a really dreadful common name for habenaria, with the landing and so on with the side petals. Familial characteristics of the orchid family. Very, very different looking flowers, but if you drill down and look at the very sublime way that they're put together in a way that is consistent with a common ancestor. So one individual, one group developed these characteristics and they blossomed into an entire family, pardon the pun. Are y'all getting this? Are you following? I hope you're following with understanding. We're gonna press on a little bit more and underscore this a little bit. And we'll try this again with some of the dicot or the dicot family. And we'll look at the rose family, the Rosaceae. You might recognize a rose. You might recognize it as being a dicot or a eudicot with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. How many stamens do we have in here? Heaven knows, we would call that many, but using another character, the leaves here, the veins within the leaves are in this case the leaflets, because this one giant leaf has been divided into smaller leaves. They're not parallel. They're branched and veined. So we have a main vein that's branched into side veins, and then those side veins are branched again. So we have that characteristic. Another member is the hog plum, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. We have a group of flowers here, but each one of those flowers has the same characteristics. Blackberry is a member of the rose family, and it's got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals, a bunch of stamens, and so on, and those branched. You can even maybe see the similarities in the leaf to that of the rose. So several familial characteristics placing this plant into the rose family. The sunflower family, another huge family of flowering plants, the largest and most diverse of the Dicot families, the Asteraceae. Blanket flower, very popular Asteraceae plant, very popular landscape plant. Native plants enthusiasts like this one. It tends to flower for quite a long time, is in the Asteraceae. You might see how it's could be related to a sunflower. Here's another native, the Florida green eyes. But here we're going to let you in on a secret of this flowering plant family, the Asteraceae. What you might think is a single flower is actually tons of smaller flowers crowded onto a disc. That is characteristic of the Asteraceae. It's characteristic of the sunflower family. So Florida green eyes being a typical daisy, but on close inspection, what you should notice is that each one of these is a single individual tubular flower crowded onto a disc with many, 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 many more flower buds to open into individual flowers. And even these along the edge are just exaggerated tubular flowers where maybe we've taken one of these tubular flowers here and just pulled and elongated and stretched out these two petals to form this flared structure here that acts to attract pollinators to all the smaller flowers that are packed along that disc. Here it is again in rosinweed. You can see those outer flowers, individual flowers with their stamens sticking out, surrounding the tubular flowers of the disc. Each one of those having a stigma and the pollen-bearing stamens unique to an individual flower. The cactus family, you can probably think without having to strain too hard what some of the characteristics of the cactus family are. The stems are flattened and the stems have taken over the act of photosynthesis. The leaves are reduced to spines oftentimes. They have many, many, many almost unnecessary to count petals and many almost unnecessary to count stamens. The whole flower is perched on top of the ovary. So the fruit actually develops, the prickly pear actually develops underneath the flower. Another characteristic of the cactus family. Even the Christmas cactus has the characteristics of the family with the flattened stems acting like leaves. Thankfully, in this case, the actual leaves are just reduced to lobes instead of spines. We have a bunch unnecessary to count petals and a bunch unnecessary to count stamens. The fruit is going to be underneath the flower. It's going to be an inferior ovary. So that's what puts the Christmas cactus actually into the cactus family. That's families. All right. We're going to get a little bit closer. Families are groups of related genera. I sent you all a bunch of handouts. You don't have to write this down. Let's go back to our family of the cats, the Felidae. The Felidae is a family, so it's broken down into what? I told you didn't have to write it down, but did you remember from one slide? Families are groups of related genera. Very good. So the Felidae as a family is composed of several different genera. Acynonyx, I had to write down the phonetics. Acynonyx is the genus of this cat, which is the cheetah. That's a genus within the Felidae, Acynonyx. Lynx is another genus within this family that includes the bobcats, plural. Puma is a genus within the family that includes the panthers, the cougars. So we have a family that's made of related genera. Genera are groups of related species. And what our goal in plant identification is to identify the species. So we have to eliminate the mosses, the ferns, the conifers, the monocot or the dicot. Then we start thinking about familial characteristics within a group. If we've determined it's a dicot, it has sunflower family characteristics. So now that we know that, we have to figure out what genus it's in within that family, and then finally what species it could be. Poor cats, I'm keeping on them. Within the family of cats, we have the genus Panthera. Within the genus Panthera, we have the species Panthera tigris. Within the genus Panthera, we have the species Panthera leo. And within the genus Panthera, we have the species Panthera pardus. You see how this works? So these three cats are in the same genus, but they're obviously different species. We have the tiger, we have the lion, and we have the jaguar. They're in the same genus. You can see that they're in the same family. And now that you know that they're in the same genus, you can perhaps start seeing how they have more in common with each other than they might with the little pin-headed cheetah or the little bobcatted bobcat. So those kind of morphological characteristics are what define these relationships. Okay? Do we all need to take a little drink of iced tea? Let's do that. All right. So, families are related genera. Genera are related species, and species are reproductively compatible in the wild, in their native habitat. Understand? We're not talking hybrids here. We're not talking zoos here. We're not talking botanic gardens here. We're talking about native plants that have speciated naturally over the millennia into species that are reproductively compatible. Back to plants. Finally, the rose family, the Rosaceae, who we met before, the swamp rose. Here we have in the very genus Rosa, giving its name to the Rosaceae, with its 5 petals and its numerous stamens and its leaflets with the netted veins, the genus Rosa, the genus Crataegus, which is the hawthorn, and it has those familial characteristics, those nice big 5 showy petals and many stamens, and the genus Prunus, the cherry genus, and we met this one before. Again, you can see the familial characteristics just like with our cats, but these actually have generic similarities that place them into these individual genera. So let's take this genus Prunus. Sound familiar, prune? Prunus, the cherry genus, includes Prunus serotina, the black cherry, one of our native cherries, with 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not going to keep doing this, but anyway, familial characteristics, the 5 petals and so on. Prunus, the laurel cherry, again with this spike of tiny little white flowers. And we also have within this genus Prunus umbellata, the one that we met before. And it's the hog plum. But you said it was in the cherry genus, Prunus. Well, yes, it's in the genus Prunus. And every scientist in the world has understood the genus Prunus contains Prunus serotina, Prunus caroliniana, Prunus umbellata, and many other Prunus. So why is this one called a plum? We'll get to that. But let's just pick on this one for a little bit more. So genus Prunus, black cherry, laurel cherry, and hog plum. 3 different species within a particular genus, but only Prunus umbellata pollen can be transferred and successfully germinate and fertilize another Prunus umbellata once that pollen has grown down into the ovary and fertilized the egg or eggs, and they have become the seeds. Can those seeds then grow? And when they grow up, they are going to be Prunus umbellata. That's the concept of species. And these are reproductively compatible. And Prunus umbellata sits and reproduces just fine. It has all the characteristics you need to identify it and it alone, and not one of its sisters, the laurel cherry or the black cherry. And Prunus umbellata we refer to as the flatwoods plum or the hog plum, but it's in the genus Prunus. That's because common names are not necessarily very common, but they're valuable. And what are some of the values of common names? And I can answer for you because I've taught this class once or twice. They're easier to remember. They're easier to say. They're not embarrassing to try and say. Very, very good. But the weaknesses of common names, again, is that they're not common and they're not always applicable scientifically, especially. There is a plant called the Australian pine that's not a pine. It's not even a conifer. So it's that kind of problem. So what are the values of scientific names? Everybody in the world uses the same name for the same species. No matter what language you speak, every scientist uses the Latin binomial for every plant. But the weaknesses of scientific names, of course, is that people are afraid of them initially. You shouldn't be, and they're definitely worth practicing, not showing off, there's no need for that, but certainly approaching and learning the language of this discipline. Just like, don't be embarrassed as you're learning the different parts of the guitar. You're not gonna remember them each time. You might pronounce one differently than someone else, but again, you're just learning the vocabulary, and eventually it becomes part of your discipline's language. And I say vocabulary, and I said guitar. Here we have the guitar, and here we have the language of the guitar. Just like plant identification. And luckily, with plant identification, there's always a glossary nearby. There are, however, a few words that are worth learning when you're setting off on your plant identification journey. And because most plant identification is done using the flower parts, well, obviously for flowering plant identification, which I mentioned we would focus on today, the different parts of the flower, it's important to recognize their name. So I sent you this attachment. Perhaps you printed it out, perhaps you didn't, it doesn't matter, but you have it available to you to use as your very first worksheet on your very first perhaps day of plant identification. And so we're going to label this thing together. So here we have a cross section, a latitudinal section. We have a section through a flower. So we have the flower coming up, we have the bud leaves, we have the next whirl in, the big attracting things. We have a section through the center of the flower, and we have a section through this penultimate inner whorl of the flower itself. So let's start with this random little bit that sticks up here on the end of this string. It is where the pollen is produced, and that is called the anther. I heard some of you say that. That was great. So the anther. It's the swelling at the end of the string, and it's where the pollen is produced and released by whatever mechanism possible. Most often, it produces pollen that's meant to be brushed onto a pollinator that will fly to another flower, but oftentimes they're modified to facilitate different pollination mechanisms. Number two, the most important important part of the flower is this central column, but on the very tip of that column is a particular spot. And its name actually means spot, and it's the stigma. That is where the pollen lands and begins to grow its journey down this tube and into this organ to fertilize this structure within. Very, very most important part of the flower, the reason that the flower is there. The big showy modified leaves around the outside, of course, are the petals. When present, they serve to attract pollinators, and they might be configured in such a way that they'll only attract a particular pollinator that will then only go and visit a plant with identical petals so that this plant can ensure that its pollen goes to a compatible stigma. Where's number 4? Number 4 is the string that holds the anther up in the air. It's just another word for string. In botany, we refer to that as the filament. Together, the anther and filament are referred to as the stamen. So stamen, we often refer to the pollen as the male cell or the male structure, and the central structure is the female structure, so stamen, that's the anther and the filament together. I gave away this next one, the sepals. Those are the modified leaves that enclose these developing flower parts until they are ready to do their jobs. So as all these parts develop and grow, the sepals produce a protective covering around the flower bud. Number 7, together, what I mentioned, the most important part, the reason that the flower even exists, this central structure is referred to as the pistil. The pistil is the stigma, the style, and the ovary together. And inside the ovary is the egg that will become the seed, which will reproduce the plant. So well done. Those are the parts of the flower. And why do they have to have, why does each separate thing have to have a name? Because each separate thing could have characteristics that help identify to family, to genus, or to species. In a particular species within a family, the filament might be a particular length, shape, color, texture. It might be present, it might be absent, it might so on. All these different things could have characters that help us determine exactly which species we're looking at. I also included these illustrated glossaries, and in the world of plants, illustrated glossaries are probably your best friend because there are so many words. It's all vocabulary because every little bit of identification counts, every different character of the sepal, of the petal, of the pistil, the stamen, and so on, as I was mentioning before. But there's other parts of the plants that have characters as well, and therefore they have names. Even just leaves themselves have a whole suite of vocabulary that goes with their shapes, their tips, their bases, and so on. Who cares? Well, as I mentioned, when you're identifying a plant and you're using whatever books, library you prefer, these are the words that are going to be referenced in the description of the plant. And if you can match the words to the specimen in your hand, you can make a positive identification. And we have some favorite books. We don't make any money off of these. We in the person of me, I should go ahead and confess. This guy, Roger Hammer, he takes fantastic photographs, and he's made several books on, regional books on wildflowers. So these are field guides. You can actually take this out with you, and this is one of those books that's arranged by color. So you don't have to go through all the, is it this family? Oh my gosh, whatever. Okay, it's a white flower, let's go to the white section. But within the white section of flowers, he then separates them by family. So you can start to learn families through the back door, through here's 5 different white daisies to choose from. Okay, I see that these are all in that Asteraceae family. Let me see what makes them different from one another. And the photographs are fantastic. Taylor's book is also of wildflowers, also broken down into colors and families. This is a favorite of a lot of people. Again, one that you can take into the field. Back home, if you've brought a specimen home and you're still working on it, it's important to have a good illustrated glossary. And Harris and Harris, the plant identification terminology, has been referred to as sacred text within the botany plant identification world. So this hasn't been bettered upon. And inside, you come across a word in a plant description, you have no idea what it means, you can look the plant up and it'll have a corresponding drawing so you can figure out where you're supposed to be looking on your specimen to determine if it is 3 centimeters or 7 centimeters. A key, a guide to vascular plants, these are generally dichotomous keys. And if you ever want to take an advanced plant ID class, we offer that from time to time, and we learn how to use this key. It's got no pictures, it's all words, it's all vocabulary, it's crazy, it's good fun. Certain books are written just for a particular group of plants. So here I have an example, the ferns of Florida. You can find books on grasses of Florida. You can find books on, just wetland plants. You can find very specific different books that treat different groups of plants individually, making a lot of eliminations for you. And finally, the book that we use on how to identify plants is aptly named How to Identify Plants. And it was written back in the 50s. And again, it hasn't been bettered. It's very, very short, small book, and it's half glossary, which is even better. But why do we have to learn all this stuff? Why can't we just take a picture of it and have someone else do it for us? Well, you can, but we kind of like to learn. And there are some apps where you can kind of, like it or not, learn a little bit along the way. And the one that we like, again, we don't get any money off of this. We just tend to like it and have been impressed with its abilities, if you will, is the iNaturalist. It's referred to as iNat. It's a free app. It is definitely social. So the information that you share is shared with everyone. But it has an amazing artificial intelligence because it is so vast and so crowdsourced, and there are so many images and so much information about location that it can really, really help you identify an unknown specimen, even in the field. I'm not very good at using this on my phone. I collect a lot of pictures in the field and then I will upload them once I get to my desk. But here's an example of one. I have an account and I'm going to upload this picture. So here it is uploaded. And then the next thing the application is going to do is it is going to send this picture through its billions and billions of photographs. And its AI is going to find something that looks similar to this plant. And it's going to give you some suggestions ranked in their order of what they think. And, it's very chatty. The first one that came up when I asked for a suggestion was that it was in the genus Michella. It might even be Michella repens, or perhaps it's in this genus or in this genus. And it allows you to view these different suggestions to see if that is even a possibility. Is it in the correct region? So I clicked on partridge berry because it was the first one that it suggested, and it showed me some pictures that looked very much like the plant that I had in my specimen in the wild. And it was here in Brooker Creek, so that's not unreasonable. It's not only found in Borneo, so that narrowed it down as a good possibility. So then I selected, okay, yeah, I'll go for that. I will go ahead and say that I found partridge berry based on this photograph. And then it goes out to all the nerds in the world. And someone out there is looking to find you wrong. I can tell you that for free. Someone's trying to gonna try and catch you out and say, no, you made the wrong choice. There's some, and a lot, that might say, hey, yeah, I agree with you. And that's what happens on this application. It gets tossed around to experts and amateurs alike. And here, this person agreed, confirmed that what I had thought might be partridge berry based on the photographs and the location was in fact partridge berry. And you can click on this person's username and find out that they have a PhD written on partridge berry. You know, this person probably knows exactly what they're talking about. So you can trust that. And so that is how this database gets better and better and better as more and more people contribute and more data is shared. It doesn't always turn out pretty. I uploaded what I thought was an earth tongue. Expert came in and said, nope, 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 it's this one. Another expert came in and said, yeah, I think you're in the right genus, but I don't think you can get it down to species. So it's all a work in progress. And so that is the app. It's interactive. If you sign up and have an account, you can get updates. It's just good fun to play with. It does take time for your suggestions to be tossed around amongst the experts to come back with a confirmation or a retraction, that sort of thing. So that's the app. Yes, there is an app for that. So to sum up today, when you're starting your journey, when you start to embark upon this new foundation for plant identification, remember to look very closely. I told you at the very beginning, you know, don't just count on one characteristic. Make sure that you've got a good, broad overview of your specimen. People might bring plants in for identification to the extension help desk, and they might bring one piece of one leaf, and they'll say, what is this plant? You need a lot of characters, and you need to look very closely and use multiple resources, whatever works for you. There isn't one book. There isn't one website. Find the ones that work for you. And practice. This is a discipline. Plant identification is a discipline. It's not a gift. It takes practice, and it takes a will to want to do it. And you know, if you wanted to play the guitar and you went to a guitar class and you didn't learn to play the guitar on that one first try, give it up. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But if you really get into it, it can become a lifelong passion, obsession. Be careful, maybe I should say. Anyway, that's wrapping up for today. I really thank you for your time. Sorry I almost kept you for a full hour. Again, if you have any questions or comments or complaints, suggestions for future classes, you can contact me at the name underneath my face here, my UF address. I also have a Pinellas County address, first initial last name at pinellascounty.org. Our next installment in Florida Supernature will be next week, and it's botanical science for beginners. Again, we're not wanting to scare anyone away. Botany is approachable, I hope. And so that'll be next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. So again, I'll leave this slide up for a little bit, let you take down any notes you need to, and drop me a line if you need to ask any questions. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.